The Three Martini Lunch is brought to you in part today by 4Patriots. Head to 4patriots.com/martini to see all of their latest deals, including the best deal they've got going right now. Get a free solar panel with the purchase of the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. The Patriot Power Generator 2000X now has double the capacity that it had before and is expandable so you can run the big appliances like your fridge, like your freezer, and medical devices even longer when your power is out. It has 12 outlets, including 4 AC, plus 2 USB-C outlets that can charge your phone 20 times faster than a regular plug. Bottom line, be prepared, and 4Patriots helps you do that. You'll never need gas to run this generator. It comes with the solar panel, fume-free, silent, and safe, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to get your Patriot Power Generator 2000X with the free solar panel included. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini.
Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Thanks so much for being with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is still away, although this time he's not in Ukraine. He's actually on spring break now. So thankfully, his trip over to Ukraine was safe. Here in his place again once today, we're happy to have Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum. She's a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute, and she, of course, is the host of the High Noon podcast. And so, Inez, great to have you back with us. Thank you.
It's great to be here, and I can only hope it's not spring break in Ukraine.
They could use a break, some of them for sure. Let's start with our good martini, which is a little bit away from the normal political fare. But in terms of where our society is right now, I think it's one of the most important ones that we have. It comes to us from Politico magazine, and it's written by Mark Novikov, but it's an interview of the social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who has been warning us for a long time about social media, screens for kids, and that sort of thing. The evidence is piling up more and more about how Gen Z was kind of the guinea pigs when it comes to this technology. They were the first, young people when this technology became ubiquitous. And now the data's coming in, and it's certainly not good. Haidt is the author of the new book, The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And so he says in this story, our children are going on a conveyor belt, and a lot of them are getting shredded. And he says the reason we know that we have a big problem with social media and constant screen time is that we got 34 studies now that suggest a causal effect, and there are 21 studies that show no effect. But here's the thing, he says, the studies that show no effect, they take measurements a day or week apart. When we look at longitudinal studies that use a month or more, the great majority find an effect. And essentially, he says back around 2010, and certainly before that, most people had flip phones. I don't think I got an iPhone until 2013. I was probably one of the later ones to do it. But back then, it was hard to get on the internet. You had to pay to get on the internet in some cases. You couldn't just sit there and veg out on your screen, basically, and then get sucked into these sites on TikTok or other social media platforms. And so the bullying that used to go on a few hours a day at school can now go on 24/7. Some kids, as we know, are getting sucked into these areas where people are trying to convince them that they're the wrong gender and that sort of thing. And so things are happening in the minds of these young people at a very vulnerable time in their life that are driving them in difficult directions, both in terms of the social pressure they're getting there, but also just the effect it's having on their brain and the mental illness because they just don't get a break. So Inez, I don't know what you're seeing. You're, I think, a little bit younger than me, but probably more the millennial generation. And I think it's probably affecting all of us. But the most vulnerable of these people were the test subjects here, and the results aren't good. But the good news here, and the reason it's a good martini, is that the spotlight is being shined on this, and hopefully it's not too late.
Yeah, a few things. One, so the iPhone, as far as I recall, came out in 2007. I'm the fat part of the bell curve of the millennial generation, but I think I skew culturally a little bit younger on these issues because I grew up in the heart of the Silicon Valley. So a lot of these things hit us first. I don't really remember not being online. I do remember dial-up, right? So I remember when it was more difficult to get online, but I didn't really experience the internet as something separate from early life that you learn, for example, in high school or college. It was part of my life from the earliest memories that I have. But as you say, I think there was a huge shift when we started carrying it around with us constantly and having access to a phone that has access to the internet in a cheap and easy and attractive way with us all the time, giving us notifications all the time. And I think that's really accelerated a lot of the perhaps ill effects, especially for young people. So a couple things. One, I love Jonathan Haidt's analogy that I once heard him use. This is kind of a classic collective action problem in a way for parents, because if everyone else's kids have a smartphone or online, a lot of the social activity happens in that space. And so you do feel legitimately in some cases like you're preventing your kids from socializing, or you're preventing them from talking to their friends and having them left out and so on. I think the analogy that Jonathan Haidt uses, which is, to my mind, it's very vivid and it really gives a sense of it. It's as if the Mars company, which makes, half of the chocolates and candies that we see at the grocery store, had a pipeline in your kid's room 24/7. And anytime they pushed it, candy would fall out. It is possible for parents to police that kind of activity around their kids, right? They can sit on them 24/7 and say, don't you push that button unless it's after dinner and, whatever. But it becomes a very, very difficult problem. And that's why Jonathan Haidt and others are pushing for some regulation around who can access these social media companies, whether it's okay for kids younger than 12 or 13 to create accounts, whether companies should be seeking 10-year-olds as customers for social media. I do think you're right. I think the conversation about this is shifting. Again, it's shifting earlier among people who adopted it earlier. So where I grew up, Silicon Valley, almost nobody allows their kids, unlimited screen time anymore. Because they did and then, sort of learned better. So I do think we're adjusting to this. I want to say one more, or point to one more person who I think has written one of the best columns I've ever read on this subject and from a larger perspective, and that's Russ Douthit. So he talks about the rising, mental problems associated with long hours on social media, particularly for young women, but talks generally about the fragility of young people, and says, look, maybe if the rest of our society was doing well, if we didn't have extremely high rates of family breakdown, if we didn't have the majority of kids in America growing up in a different situation than their married mother and father under the same roof, if we had larger and stronger families, if we had, more built-in community that we used to have with the sort of secularization and rise of social libertinism and atomization, if those trends weren't already in place, and he says by the 90s, right, where they seemed only on the up and up, that maybe we would be able to withstand this storm of technology and we'd be able to regulate it better and we'd be able to balance the goods of, social media and constant connection on the internet and the advancement that obviously comes with that. And, being able to raise kids who have a sense of self, who feel, both safe and confident, safe at home and confident in venturing out into the world. And he basically says, we were already weak before this storm hit us. And what it's revealed is that the way that American families are structured and are able to raise children has had a really, really difficult time with this additional technological storm. And I think that's probably the best way to think about it.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a genius to figure this stuff out. We don't give our kids access to the internet. There's no social media for them. They don't have phones, and they won't for as long as humanly possible. They do have screens that they use for playing some games that don't connect with any other people. And we can see that they are more agitated after being on the screens. Whereas if we send them outside to play with their friends, they're much happier. Fresh air, dealing with people face to face, using their imaginations, or just riding bikes. And as Abigail Schreier, who has written on the young women being lured into the trans epidemic right now, she recommends not having these screens at all. But erring on the side of caution is probably the smarter way to go here for parents. And hopefully, I don't know about reversing the mental illness that's happened already to those who are kind of in the beta test phase here with these screens and social media is going to be easy or not. But at least there are lessons to be learned here for parents going forward. And I think that should be helpful.
Well, yeah. So Abigail Schreier traces the fragility and the mental problems back before the ubiquity of social media and smartphones. And she gives a number of I think, very good suggestions as to why that might be so, leaning at certain kinds of parenting or generally a therapeutic culture, even outside of the therapist's office. So I definitely think those are feeding into this as well. It's not only tech and social media, but what you said is very true. That obviously, like the sort of obvious counterbalance to this is, send the kids outside, have them actually play IRL, right? Have real community, talk to each other. The problem is, and just to bring up more, I think there've been just a number of really salient books being published that are really important recently. And the last one in this trio that we're discussing is Family Unfriendly by Timothy Carney, who I interviewed on my own podcast last week about it. There's so many structures in American life that make it difficult to send your kids to just play outside for a few hours, like in an unstructured way, right? Some of them are sort of invented by or like sort of cultural trends that make parents too nervous about things that aren't really actually that much of a danger. But some of them are very real, right? Like he talks about the structure of American suburbs and the fact that like there are huge, 4-lane highways everywhere and there's nowhere to walk. So, he can't send his kids to the grocery store until they're much, much older, whereas he'd feel very comfortable sending them off in a batch in terms of, other dangers, but they have to cross basically a highway to get to the grocery store less than a mile away. Some of those structural sort of the way that American family life is built and the way that our culture has become very unfriendly to kids just being outside, as you say, I think really does feed into this. And it goes back to Douthit's point, I think, that there are deeper cultural and family and secularization and atomization issues in American life. And then all of that just got like punched in the face by this very earth-shaking change that everybody can, including, 10-year-olds, can just doom scroll all day from the device in their pocket. So changing that one thing, I think the winds are shifting. I think parents are much more aware of the dangers of just letting their kids have an all-access smartphone or iPad. But I think it's going to take a lot more than that to sort of seam back together some semblance of community life and of sanity when it comes to kids going outside to play with each other.
One of the great sponsors of the Three Martini Lunch is Fast Growing Trees, which has the biggest online nursery in the United States with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and more than 2 million happy customers right here in the United States. You can grow lemon, avocado, olive, or fig trees inside your home on top of the wide variety of house plants available. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped directly to your door in 1 to 2 days. And along with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever. As I mentioned, we just ordered the little deck kit with a bunch of different cool spices. There's the basil, there's the oregano, there's some dill. Smells great. Can't wait until Mrs. Columbus incorporates that into our dinners. Right now, Fast Growing Trees has the best deals online, up to half off on select plants, and listeners to the Three Martini Lunch get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code Martini at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code Martini at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code Martini. Offer is valid for a limited time. Please tell them we sent you. All right, Inez, let's talk about our bad martini now. And there seems to be a trend among disgruntled House Republicans. It's not enough to announce that you're no longer planning to run for re-election here in 2024. No, you just got to leave. But just a couple of weeks ago, we heard from Ken Buck, who's been very frustrated with Congress for the last couple of years, announced that he wasn't running for re-election. And then all of a sudden, I'm actually resigning. And so I'm pretty sure he's already gone by now. And then Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, who at the end of last year, and as in our year-end awards, labeled the rising star of the Republican Party due to his work on the Select China Committee in the House. Well, a couple months later, that proved to be a bit premature because he announced that he was not running for re-election, and then on Friday announced he also is resigning effective April 19th. First of all, as I tweeted out, unless you're dying, an immediate family member is dying, or you're about to be indicted, particularly if you're a House member, these are only 2-year terms, honor the commitment that you made. But here's the weirder part. Gallagher is resigning on April 19th, which is, nearly a month after he makes this announcement. And a number of folks have checked Wisconsin election law, and by resigning that late instead of, when he made the announcement, that's too late for Wisconsin to hold a special election. So that seat will remain vacant from April 19th until there's a winner of the seat for that House race in Wisconsin in November, which when you're trying to keep it open and not have representation for your district, that seems more sinister than just I'm fed up with this place. So what do you make of this trend we're seeing that's narrowing this majority considerably?
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of the sort of gerontocracy trend where people are clearly failing on both sides of the aisle because they're late into their 80s and unable to perform their jobs, and they refuse to resign. But you would know better than I would what sort of this portends for the Republican Party. Honestly, especially leaving the seat vacant and leaving people with no representation just on a basic civics level. I mean, if you can avoid that in any way, you have a duty to. You did run to represent the people in your district, and leaving them without representation, as you well know, it's not just about the votes that get written up in the media, right? There's 1,000 horse trading things behind the scenes. There's constituent services. Those things won't be available to people in his district, and that's really an abdication of duty unless you are really like hard up health wise or have some other kind of emergency. It's really unacceptable to do in my view, just from a civics perspective. But I mean, the Republicans brought this upon themselves too, right? They expelled George Santos, who legitimately lied about a lot of things. Whether that makes him unique in the realm of politicians, I don't know, but he certainly lied more blatantly and obviously than a lot of people. But expelling him lost them a seat as well. Overall, I guess it's hard for me to get worked up about the exact margin, even though I realize it makes it very difficult for the speaker, for Speaker Johnson, and for all the speakers before him, and all the failed speakers before him, to have that small margin. Look, it gives the right more leverage and more power when there's a narrow majority as opposed to a large one. It gives the Freedom Caucus more power. Now, some people don't like that, but that's sort of the rules of the game. And the other thing is, you know what? When the Republican Party does have a fat majority, they so rarely do anything that is important legislatively to any of the priorities of their base or of the right or conservatives, that it's difficult for me to get worked up. I mean, obviously, I don't want full Democratic control because that means that they're going to do a lot of things that I don't like. But the difference between a large majority and a small one for the Republican Party, like, to me, it makes life in Washington harder, but doesn't really make my life much harder because I didn't have any great hopes about what they were going to do to begin with legislatively.
When Ken Buck left, there was an Axios story where he was asked, are the Republicans mad at you for leaving and having one less vote? And he said, not as mad as they're going to be when the next three people do it. And so it's like he knew potentially that Gallagher and maybe others were thinking about this. But the idea from Ken Buck that they're, in his mind at least, and potentially he actually had these conversations, that more people are planning to hit the bricks in a way that could lend the Democrats the chance to have the majority in the House, the Senate, and control the White House before the end of the year. Extremely concerning.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's concerning. It does really reveal, right, how much these people are on the same team. At the end of the day, they get more frustrated oftentimes with the demands of their base than they get with the demands of the opposing party. Look, that this is not it's hardly the first time that there's been a kind of uniparty rule in Washington. And often that does engender a kind of populist backlash. I mean, I'm thinking about the era that historians call the era of good feelings, but was not quite the era of good feelings in America. This is after the founding generation is old enough and exits politics because they don't hang on to power into their 90s the way that our current leadership did. Who's they're still Thomas Jefferson is still alive, Madison is still alive, but they're taking the role of the elder statesman and advising their political factions rather than actively engaging in politics, and kind of is this one party rule. And then you have a huge Jacksonian populist revolution, right, that takes 2 elections to secure itself. And that's a whole complicated mess itself. But in any case, I mean, we've had that sense before, and even Reagan coming in the 80s was a break with both parties. I think the Republican Party, the weakness that they have with their base is something that goes back at least to 2007. I mean, I think with the revolts against George W. Bush over immigration, I think it goes back even further than that. I mean, essentially the entire post-Reagan era has been an era of slow disillusionment for conservatives voting for the Republican Party. So we'll see where all those forces, because I think that's ultimately the problem when you talk about having a narrow majority and the Republicans being at each other's throats. That's ultimately the problem. There are very, very different views under the Republican Party auspice. And those conflicts are real, and they shouldn't be, I think, dismissed in terms of like party unity. I'm not particularly interested in party unity. Obviously, I don't want the Democrats to take power here, and I agree with you on that. But if party unity means not accomplishing things that are increasingly important for, I think, the country, forget about the base, then I'm sort of less interested in that as an outcome. I think it's fine when Washington is in disarray. I mean, hell, the whole country's in disarray right now in 1,000 different ways. And I think it's fine if Washington comes along for the ride and feels a little bit of the chaos.
All right, let's talk about a brand new sponsor. Happy to have them. Factor Meals. Eating better is easy with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals because every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to go, most importantly, in just 2 minutes. Right now, when you go to factormeals.com/3ml50, you can get 50% off. Use the code 3ml50 to get that discount. You'll have over 35 different options to choose from every week, including Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto options. You get pancakes, smoothies, and other options, plus more than 60 add-ons to help you stay fueled up and feeling good all day long. No prep, no mess meals. They're perfectly flexible for your schedule, and Factor is the perfect solution if you're looking for fast, premium options with no cooking required. Plus, sign up and save. They've done the math. Factor is less expensive than takeout, and every meal is dietitian approved. Sign up online at factormeals.com/3ml50. That's 3ml50, and use the code 3ml50 to get 50% off. What are you waiting for? Get started today and get after your goals. Save 50% with code 3ml50 at factormeals.com/3ml50. That's factormeals.com/3ml50. All right, Inez, on to our crazy martini now. And on some level, I'm thankful that this hasn't gotten blast coverage from all the different media outlets. But the fact that it's even happening at all means we need to give it some attention. And that's kind of the reemergence of Christine Blasey Ford. She's now out with a book telling her story from the Kavanaugh hearings and probably more beyond that. And of course, the liberal media, just like it did in 2018, is presenting Christine Blasey Ford as the hero of this story and not the person whose accusation had absolutely no facts to it. So The Atlantic, of course, is more than happy to peddle her story. And the way that Megan Garber, a staff writer over there at Atlantic, is premising this whole attention is fascinating. Quote, Kavanaugh spoke after Ford, meaning at the hearings back in the fall of 2018, and the gulf between the two testimonies was in retrospect an omen. She offered evidence. No. He offered grievance. She spoke science. He spoke politics. She was piecing together fragments of a story, parts of which she had forgotten. He was controlling the narrative. And as I know the left thinks that if it keeps trying to pound this story, it's going to get the public to eventually believe it, kind of like the numbers on Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill were vastly in his favor at the time of that scurrilous allegation in 1991. And now, just because of the constant drumbeat, more Americans believe her side of the story. But the facts haven't changed here, or the lack of facts. None of the witnesses she presented said that they remembered anything about that. Her own father apologized to Brett Kavanaugh's father. This whole story about her being terrified to take a flight to Washington to tell her story hasn't panned out because apparently she took another flight to be on The View last week. And so I don't know why they're doing this other than to further potentially delegitimize the court. But what do you make of the Christine Blasey Ford rehabilitation project here?
Yeah, I mean, the facts are how you laid them out, right? She can't conjure up one single bit of evidence that they've even ever met, let alone of the things that she accused Brett Kavanaugh of. There is nothing that is corroborated at all in her story, even by those witnesses which she presented as being there. They don't recall anything like this. It was an extraordinarily weak story, but I will say her testimony to certain people at the time seemed credible, and I can't fathom why that was so, because I think she comes off as not particularly, not just credible, but not particularly balanced. in any case, I don't know, but people did find her story credible until Kavanaugh came out and testified in his own defense, which that's what that Atlantic article is sneeringly pointing to, that he brought the narrative or whatever. No, what he brought was the righteous anger of a man who has conducted himself, by all accounts, in an exemplary way towards the women around him and who worked under him, with no hint of this kind of scandal, and who was accused of a heinous crime without any evidence and had the entire country and media run with that story for political gain. And let's not forget the even more ludicrous accusations that came out after Christine Blasey Ford, right? The Kavanaugh is a gang rapist, right, in college, that, just absolutely absurd stuff from the now jailed Michael Avenatti, right? That's all kind of shoved under the rug. But I think the key point is what you brought up. This happened with Anita Hill. Anita Hill, when people actually watched her testimony and Clarence Thomas's testimony in those hearings, overwhelmingly came away in polling at the time with the perspective that Clarence Thomas was being falsely accused. This was a high-tech lynching, as he said in the hearing, that this was completely political and a totally illegitimate smear against somebody who was nominated for the high court, right? That was the perspective of people watching it at the time, overwhelmingly. Fast forward 30 years later, Anita Hill is pretty much 50-50. Even most polls, she gets like a majority, because in the intervening 30 years, Hollywood and the media went to work, lionizing her story, which at least had more credibility than Christine Blasey Ford, because Anita Hill did, in fact, work with Clarence Thomas, right, and followed him job to job, right? So these are two people who actually had interactions, as opposed to the fact that Christine Blasey Ford cannot in any way corroborate that she was ever in the same room with Justice Kavanaugh. But the way in which this has remained an asterisk on Clarence Thomas's life and career is such a miscarriage of justice, and it happened largely after the hearings. So that's why we should take this seriously. We should push back against this rehabilitation of Christine Blasey Ford. And then just as a final point, the most important thing to realize, yes, this played out in this very public political context, right? And we all got really mad about it because it was so obvious he was being smeared. There are hundreds of college boys that are having this kind of Star Chamber trial in colleges across the country. A small percentage of them, they actually have the resources and the gumption to continue to vindicate their due process rights in federal courts. And there have been more than 200 decisions in federal courts saying that universities have violated due process rights, mostly of young college men, in adjudicating what are essentially he said, she said situations that don't look anything like what the typical person thinks of as quote unquote rape. We're talking about ambiguous miscommunications between people, both of whom are usually intoxicated, right? Obviously, this is a different situation than the flat out smear that was brought against Kavanaugh, but it's worth pointing out that this was Joe Biden's beat when he was vice president under the Obama administration. The Dear Colleague letter that went out under that administration that encouraged universities to do this, which was reversed by Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration with actual due process protecting regulations, now attempted to reverse again. But the reason that they haven't been able to do it until now in the Biden administration is because the DeVos administration under Trump did such a good job of putting forward these regs that they've had to go through a lot of hoops to try to undo them. But in any case, there is a due process crisis. I know we talk about Title IX a lot because in the context of the redefinition of sex, and that is obviously the thing that is at forefront of mind and is very important for athletes around the country who are, women competing against men, twisting Title IX to sort of recognize the delusions of people who would like to pretend that they're the opposite sex, except they're competing in a physical sport against women. That's all. I'm not saying that doesn't deserve attention, but that same regulation, once again, strips due process rights that are necessary. And we saw in the Kavanaugh hearings how necessary they are. In a lot of those hearings in college campuses, those boys do not get to do what Kavanaugh did. They do not get to go in and hear exactly what their accuser is accusing them of and then present evidence on their behalf and tell their side of the story. They are not given those rights to do that. And we saw how important. If we had only heard from Christine Blasey Ford, I think there would be a very different outcome if we had never heard from Kavanaugh in that. And there are a lot of boys around this country who've been denied that right. and in these kinds of situations. So anyway, that there is a policy, and a very serious one, behind this, one that Joe Biden has always been at the forefront of, except, of course, when someone accused him of sexual impropriety, right? Then the media buried that story.
The whiplash is phenomenal here. Of course, the Kavanaugh situation happened in the heat of the Me Too movement that was late 2017 throughout 2018. And in less than 5 years, the Democrats went from saying that we have to believe and protect all women to women shut up and let the men into your locker rooms and your athletic teams and everything else. So the 180 has been quite something to watch. Inez, great to have you with us as always today. We look forward to having you back on Wednesday. So appreciate your time. Have a great day.
You too. I'll be here.
Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum, also a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute, host of the High Noon podcast. In for Jim Garrity today, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. Inez is at Inez Felcher. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Monday. Join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.